Tom Girardi appeared in court on Monday here in downtown LA. I was like, oh my God, hey, Tom Girardi is just down the street from me because I don't live far from the courthouse. Going to the courthouse and we're gonna get arrested. So he was joined by his brother Robert, and it looks like he had two public defenders that were with him and his caregiver, or who we believe was his caregiver. And Homegirl did not want to be noticed at all. She had her sunglasses on. She had her hair covered. Like, she wanted to be as incognito as possible. But so he had to appear for his hearing here in Los Angeles after the indictment that came last week. And the judge approved his lawyers or his attorney's request to have a mental competency hearing. So as of now, for right now, the judge has entered a plea on Tom Girardi's half, and that plea is not guilty until that they can prove that he is mentally fit enough to stand trial, because that's likely what'll have to happen next is the trial. No date has been set yet for the mental competency hearing. Tom was allowed to post bond at $250,000, which was signed for by his brother Robert. So we'll have to see what happens next. But right now, like, I'm very curious, like, what the evaluation is going to determine. I mean, I assume that there will have to be some sort of brain scan, right? I hear that there are blood tests that can be conducted to see if there are certain proteins or in the blood that can likely be a factor with dementia. I hear that there are certain genetics tests that can be done. I would assume that the government is going to probably try and pursue all of this and not just do like a doctor evaluation. Like, what is your memory like? What do you remember last week? What do you remember eating for breakfast? Like, I don't know what the standard evaluation is, but I assume whatever evaluation he initially had, it was probably one of the, easier Alzheimer's and dementia evaluations that didn't involve the brain scan and that didn't involve any blood testing or genetics testing, because I feel like if they had done any of that, that would have come out at some point. They would have used that as evidence to prove Tom really does have Alzheimer's or dementia. And if they did conduct that back then, I would assume they would have provided that Monday when Tom had to appear in court as proof, being like, hey, here we go. Here's the actual proof. Here are the tests that we've already done that verified that this diagnosis sticks. So we'll have to see. He currently faces 5 counts of wire fraud and owes an alleged $15 million to clients that he embezzled funds from here in Los Angeles. And then this is all separate from the indictment that happened in Chicago with the Lion Air plane crash families that Girardi Keese and Edelson PC previously represented, where Tom is facing 8 counts of wire fraud and 4 counts of contempt. And that's also with his CFO, Christopher Camone, and his son-in-law, David Lira. I believe Camone also is being charged here in Los Angeles in addition to Chicago. I don't believe David Lira is being charged in LA. I believe David Lira, his son-in-law, who's married to Tom's daughter, Jacqueline, I believe he's only been indicted. He was only indicted in Chicago because, again, it was specifically in relation to the Lion Air plane crash families. So I also have questions here too, right? Like, I want to know, where did this $250,000 bond come from? That also sounds kind of low, Judge. Why are we only giving him $250,000 bond? Like, I mean, I get it. He's kind of old and he's not much of a flight risk. So that, I'm sure that factored into it as well. And I hear he had to turn over his passport. So, I mean, he doesn't seem like much of a flight risk, but like $250,000 just seems a little low. And like, where did his brother get that cash? And who's paying for the assisted care facility? And how do we have $250,000 to be able to pay for the bond, and we're paying for the care facility, which I believe, if I remember correctly, is like $8,000 a month. Don't quote me on that. That's solely going based off of my recollection of when he entered the facility, and I believe that was reported by Ronald Richards. So take that with a grain of salt. He's not the most reliable source, just because he likes to operate in speculation and like vague insinuations. So unclear if that's true. That's just what I remember being reported at the time. But like, I mean, he dropped his attorneys to now have public defenders, but like, I'm curious what those public defenders are even doing. Like, are they having meetings with him? Are they having meetings with his conservator, his brother Robert? Like, I'm very confused by this whole thing. A lot of people are upset that Tom was able to kind of just walk away and pay his $250,000 and peace out. I don't know. I think the bond was way too low. People in the courthouse, I know Kimberly Archie, was claiming that it felt like this was all kind of an act and it was very performative. I don't know. It's possible. But I also think, plain devil's advocate, it's also possible that when you're in a care facility for the past 2 years and you kind of aren't really doing anything to activate your brain and you're in your 80s, like we see people like widows after they lose a spouse and they kind of just are stuck at home, like they kind of fall into mental decline if they're not actively exercising those muscles. You know what I mean? So it's possible that since then, maybe he has really fallen into mental decline and maybe it was just some sort of like self-fulfilling prophecy. And now that if they do an evaluation currently, maybe it will show that. I honestly don't know. The whole thing is confusing. The whole thing is jarring to me. And I'm very much like, I don't know. I don't know. But I feel like I'm afraid he's going to get off easy. And that's my biggest concern, is that he's just going to end up in the assisted care facility. And I know people have different feelings about that. Like I've seen people online and they're like, I would rather him be in an assisted care facility where at least he's paying the money and it's not on taxpayers' dollars. If he really does have dementia, then is it worth it to lock him up because he's not even aware of what's going on? Is that justice? I mean, obviously, if he were to go to prison, he would go into, somewhere that would be able to care for him and his Alzheimer's and dementia diagnosis, because people with Alzheimer's and dementia do go to prison and they do get locked up, or they're there for lifetime in prison and they fall down the mental decline while in prison, and that's still on the responsibility of the prison to care for them. It's a lot, and I don't know how to feel about all of it. But I am afraid he's probably going to get away with this. How is he going to pay back the restitution, the $15 million in Chicago? He's looking at paying $3 million. I would assume that that's not going to be paid for by him, but that's still going to be the responsibility of his personal bankruptcy trustee, which is Rund. We have Miller, who's running the Girardi Keese bankruptcy case, and then we have Rund, who's running Tom Girardi's personal bankruptcy case. So all of Tom's personal finances and personal debts, that's being handled by Rund. And then Miller's over here, the one that's trying to pay back all the debt that Girardi Keese owes. So unclear which one of them will end up having to take on this debt. I mean, maybe Miller, since Miller runs Girardi Keese and he's responsible. Well, I don't know. It depends on how the judgment lands. It's a lot. Very curious what your thoughts are. If you're watching this on YouTube, drop a comment below and let me know how you feel and what you even think is justice for Tom at this point. Obviously, what's his face? The CFO is still of sound mind, and David Lira is still of sound mind, the son-in-law. So they can go to prison and they can have to pay back some of this money. So if they were complicit and knew and are culpable and this goes to trial and they're found guilty, then yeah, I absolutely believe that they need to be locked up. And as I've told you guys before, each wire fraud case is punishable of up to 20 years in prison, and they're facing a lot. So they're looking at lifetime in prison, all three of them. Tom's probably going to be the one that ends up getting off because, I mean, at least at this point, we'll be able to determine whether or not he really does have Alzheimer's and dementia. We can put that to rest. And then what is considered justice after that? I don't know.